The air in my lungs turned to ice the moment I saw him there, at the far end of that impossible table. Just an hour before, he had been a fragment of broken humanity, a shivering soul on a cold park bench. Now, he was a king on a throne, and I was walking into a gilded arena where my entire future would be decided. But this story doesn't begin in that mansion of echoing marble and watchful portraits. It begins with a piece of paper that felt like a verdict, and a love that suddenly had a price. It arrived not as an invitation, but as a summons. The email was stark, clinical, from a firm of lawyers whose very letterhead seemed to whisper of old money and colder judgments. Mr. Arthur Sterling requests the presence. The words were a trapdoor opening beneath my feet. David, my fiancé, held my hand that night, but his own was trembling. His father was not a man, he was a spectre, a billionaire phantom who had built an empire with sheer will and then vanished behind high walls, severing ties with his own eldest son for the crime of an unsuitable marriage. And now, the ghost was ready to weigh my soul. David's fear was a living thing in our small apartment. "He doesn't do normal, Ava," he'd say, his eyes wide with a dread I'd never seen in him. "This is an examination. Of you. Of us. Everything depends on him approving of you." He gave me a list, a scripture of survival. "Speak of art, of history, of economics. Do not mention my work at the community non-profit. Do not allude to my parents' simple, loving home. Wear the navy dress. Wear the cashmere scarf he bought me. Appearances were armor. And above all," he pleaded, his voice cracking with the strain, "do not be late." Tardiness, to Arthur Sterling, was the first sign of a feeble mind. The morning of the dinner, I dressed like a soldier for a war I didn't believe in. The scarf, soft as a whisper against my skin, felt like a chain. I was a performer learning my lines, smoothing my costume, my stomach a clenched fist of anxiety. I was so consumed with not failing this arbitrary, terrifying test that I had nearly forgotten the person I was at my core. I took the train to his cloistered, wealthy town, the scenery shifting from bustling city to silent, sprawling estates hidden behind hedges so tall they seemed to guard secrets. David had gone ahead, to prepare the ground. My instructions were to take a taxi from the station, but as I stepped onto the platform, the oppressive weight of the performance ahead stole the air from my lungs. I needed to walk. I needed to feel real ground under my feet before I entered that world of illusions. The neighborhood was a portrait of pristine silence. Manicured lawns stretched like emerald lakes beneath ancient oaks. The only sound was the whisper of the wind and the frantic beat of my own heart. I checked my watch, I had time. And then, I saw him. A stain on the perfect canvas. On a bench in a small, perfect park, an old man sat hunched against the world. His clothes were worn thin by life, his face a map of hard roads and lonely winters. He shivered violently, a leaf clinging to a branch in a gathering storm. My first, instinctive thought was David's panicked voice. "Do not be late. Do not get involved." I took a step forward, my expensive heels sinking into the soft grass. But then he looked up. His eyes were a clear, startling blue, intelligent and deep, holding a sadness so profound it was like a physical ache in my own chest. In them, I didn't see a problem or a distraction. I saw a person. My grandmother's voice, warm and firm from memory, cut through David's warnings. "The measure of your heart, my girl, is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you." At that moment, something in me broke free. To hell with the test. To hell with the scarf and the rules and the terrifying king in his mountain castle. I changed course. "Excuse me, sir," I said, my voice soft in the quiet afternoon. "Are you all right?" He looked at me, and a faint, weary smile touched his lips. "Just a little cold, young lady," he rasped. And I seemed to have missed my lunch. I didn't think. I opened my bag and pulled out the simple sandwich I'd brought for the train, my only lunch. "Here," I said, offering it. "It's not much, but it's yours." He stared at the sandwich, then at my face, a strange, unreadable emotion flickering in those blue depths. He took it with a nod that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 thanks. "That is very kind." He shivered again, a full-body tremor that shook his thin frame. And then, acting on an impulse that felt purer than any rule, I reached up and unwound the soft, cream-colored cashmere scarf from around my neck. I draped it gently over his shoulders, the fine wool a stark contrast against his threadbare jacket. "You need this more than I do," I whispered. He touched the scarf, his gnarled fingers tracing the weave, before his eyes found mine again. They searched my face, and for a second, I felt truly seen, not as a prospective daughter-in-law, but as a human being. "You are a very kind woman," he said, and the words felt like a blessing. I smiled, wished him well, and as I walked away, a different, more primal panic set in. I checked my watch. I was late. I had failed David's test before I had even arrived. I rushed the rest of the way, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm of regret and defiance. The Sterling estate appeared like a fortress, its wrought iron gates snarling with a golden S. I announced myself to the intercom, my voice trembling, and the gates swung open with a silent, ominous grace. The driveway was a tunnel through a private forest, leading to a monstrously beautiful stone mansion that glared down at me with 100 windowed eyes. And there, on the grand steps, was David. He was pacing, a portrait of ruin. When he saw me, his face collapsed from anxiety into sheer fury. "Ava, where have you been?" he hissed, grabbing my arm. "You are 17 minutes late." 17. This is a catastrophe. His words were sharp, frantic. I tried to explain, my breath short. There was an old man, on a bench, he was cold and hungry, I had to stop. He stared, uncomprehending. "A homeless man," he repeated, the words dripping with horror. "You were late because of a homeless man." Then his eyes dropped to my neck. His face paled. "Your scarf. Where is your scarf?" "The cashmere one." "I gave it to him," I said, my voice small but clear. The blood drained completely from his face. "You gave it. Ava, it was $700. You gave it to a bum." His whisper was a lash. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This isn't one of your charity projects. This is my father. He judges everything. And you show up late, looking like you've been robbed, without the one decent thing you owned." His fear had curdled into cruelty, and it laid bare the fragile, desperate boy inside the man I loved. In that moment, on the porch of that palace, a cold calm settled over me. I had chosen kindness. If that made me unworthy of this gilded world, then I wanted no part of it. The massive oak doors opened. A butler, tall and silent as a shadow, intoned, "Mr. Sterling will see you now." David straightened, his panic returning in a wave. He clutched my hand, his grip slick with sweat. "Just smile," he begged. "Be quiet. Let me talk. For God's sake, don't mention the bench. Don't mention the scarf. Just be perfect." He pulled me into a foyer so vast our footsteps echoed like guilty heartbeats on the marble. It was a museum of wealth, cold and loveless. We were led down a silent hall, a walk that felt like a procession to the gallows. The butler stopped before towering darkwood doors. From within, I heard a low, rasping voice. A familiar cadence that sent a jolt of impossible recognition through me. "No. It can't be." The doors opened. The dining room was a cathedral of dark wood and shimmering crystal. And at the far end of a table long enough to seat 50, sat one man. David was still whispering frantic instructions, but his voice faded into a meaningless hum. My entire world narrowed to that figure. My mind screamed in denial. It was a trick of the light, a cruel coincidence. But then he moved. He adjusted the fabric around his neck, a soft, cream-colored splash against his worn jacket. My cashmere scarf. Time stopped. I stood frozen in the doorway, my body turned to stone. David, sensing my paralysis, followed my gaze. The transformation in him was instantaneous and horrifying. All color, all pretense of composure, fled his face. His jaw went slack. "Father," he squeaked, the word barely audible. What are you wearing? Are you ill?" The man at the head of the table did not look at his son. His clear blue eyes, the eyes from the bench, were fixed on me. And he smiled, a warm, genuine, knowing smile that lit up his weathered face. "Welcome, Ava," he said, his voice the same kind rasp. Please, come in. Have a seat. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. I do apologize for my appearance earlier. It's an old, rather eccentric habit of mine. The room seemed to tilt. The shivering stranger and the legendary Arthur Sterling fused into one person, and the revelation was so vertiginous I thought I might fall. David made a small, choked sound beside me, the sound of his entire understanding of the world shattering. Arthur's gaze finally shifted to his son, and the warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial chill. You look surprised, David. You shouldn't be. You, of all people, should know I value character above all else. It is the only true currency in a bankrupt world. He spoke to the room, his voice echoing. For a decade, I have tested people. Heirs, CEOs, ambitious young men, they come here and perform. They perform beautifully. He sighed, a sound of bottomless weariness. But it is always a performance. Then he looked back at me, and his eyes thawed, filling with a respect so profound it brought sudden tears to my own. And then today, he continued, his voice softening, this young woman. Your fiancé. Terrified of meeting the tyrant, already late, knowing every second and every stitch of clothing mattered. He paused, letting the silence stretch. She saw a man in need. And she stopped. She gave him her only food. She gave him the very scarf from her own neck, the scarf you told her would prove her worth. He touched the fabric at his throat. She failed your test, David. Your test of superficialities. But she passed mine. The only one that has ever mattered. She passed with the flying colors of a compassionate heart. He turned his full attention to me, his smile returning. Now, Ava, he said, gesturing again to the seat of honor at his right hand. Let's have dinner. It seems we have a wedding to plan, and the future of an empire to discuss. He glanced, almost as an afterthought, at his son, who stood trembling and broken. David, you may stay and listen. Or you may go. The choice, for once, is entirely yours. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. David stood immobilized by humiliation, watching the father he realized he never knew. I, guided by some deep instinct, began the long walk down the length of the table. The click of my heels was the only sound. I took the seat beside Arthur Sterling. David eventually shuffled forward, a ghost of himself, and sat at the farthest possible end, small and diminished. The dinner that followed was the most surreal and intimate of my life. The butler served exquisite courses, but the real sustenance was the conversation. Arthur ignored David completely. He asked me about my life, my real life. He asked about the non-profit, his questions sharp and insightful, truly listening as I spoke of the community garden, the children's faces. He asked about my parents, and I told him of their simple dignity, their lessons of kindness. They raised a remarkable woman, he said, and I believed him. Between the main course and dessert, he carefully unwound the cashmere scarf. He folded it with a tenderness that moved me deeply and handed it back to me. This is yours, he said. It was a great comfort. Thank you. The wool was warm from his skin. When the evening ended, Arthur walked us to the door. He placed a hand on David's shoulder, and his voice was low, firm, and final. You have a remarkable woman. Do not make the mistake of underestimating her heart again. Your place in my world is secure tonight not because of you, but because of her. Now go home. Be the man she deserves. The drive back was a journey through a silence thick with shame and revelation. David did not speak. He stared at the road, his knuckles white on the wheel. When we finally reached the familiar, humble safety of our apartment, he broke. He sat on our sofa and wept, great, heaving sobs of regret for his cowardice, for his blindness, for every moment he had tried to shrink my spirit to fit into a gilded cage. It was the most honest and vulnerable I had ever seen him. The man I loved was finally emerging from behind the mask of the fearful sun. Our wedding, months later, was not in a cathedral or a ballroom. It was in my parents' sun-drenched backyard, filled with laughter and real flowers. Arthur Sterling was there, impeccable in a tailored suit. But around his shoulders, worn with quiet pride, was my cashmere scarf. He was not a billionaire or a recluse. He was family. He was my father-in-law. As I stood, holding David's hands, looking into the eyes of the humbler, truer man he had become, I thought of tests. I had walked toward a mansion terrified of failing a test of appearances. I had failed it utterly. And in that glorious, compassionate failure, I had passed the only test that echoes into eternity, the test of humanity, of kindness offered freely in a moment when you believe no one of consequence is watching. My reward was not a fortune or a title. It was a family forged in truth. It was the profound, unshakable knowledge that our true legacy is not written in ledgers or carved in stone, but in the gentle, courageous moments we choose to see a stranger not as a shadow, but as a soul. And in that choice, we forever change the story of our own lives.